I sync
Mine says
with
27 as well. What's happening?
What if we just went to minutes? Just get rid of hours.
Or invent an international time for everyone, and it could be used on the internet.
Yeah, what if we instead of like we don't even go UTC, we just keep minutes and we do letters.
Letters?
It's D27.
Why letters?
That would confuse.
Well, because we've all grown up associating, 6 is either early or early evening, right? So if you make it the same number for everybody, it throws everybody off. But if you do letters, none of us have an association with the letter.
No, but I think if you count minutes, it's just the same. Like how many?
Yeah.
Right. So you have
for the hour, you'd change the hour to a letter.
No, you don't need that. Just count minutes and add, like, you'll have what, 1,500 minutes in a day?
I see what you're saying. I get it. Yeah. Okay. All right. That could work.
I think that is new and different enough.
Yeah. That also breaks the, the associations.
Mm-hmm. So, but where do we base the start, though? I think GMT
Greenwich.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know that's got a colonial association, but it's just everybody uses it. That's what UTC uses.
Right.
So.
I think it should be based on Hawaii because it's in the it's the most.
Or we can do the dateline.
Which one is the dayline?
It doesn't have a particular location. It just goes right through the Pacific.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it has a location.
Oh, right.
It's not like a country.
Probably the dateline should be.
Maybe the dateline's better. Yeah. Sarah thinks we're nuts.
No, I think you guys are great.
I think your impractical plan to change all of time and dates is perfectly acceptable.
Yeah,
that was probably the most sincere statement I have.
It also avoided the question. It was very diplomatic.
Right. Yeah. Do you not like this conversation? You're all great.
That's handy. That's a handy tip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Eye contact. People are like, thanks. Wait, what happened?
Who's right here? You're all great.
I like it.
Okay. Let's get going, shall we?
Okay. Let's do it.
Here we go. 3, 2.
Do you like listening to advertisements? Me neither. Want to help and support creators directly? Then head to dailytechnewsshow.com/support and help us reach our new milestone today.
This is the Daily Tech News for Tuesday, March 20th, 2018 from DTNS headquarters in Los Angeles. I'm Tom Merritt.
And from Studio Feline, I'm Sarah Lane.
And from Cry Central in Helsinki, I'm Patrick Beja.
You can tell where things are with Patrick and his newfound fatherhood.
Right. I'm talking about my cries, not his.
Yes, of course.
Those are two different,
the cries of a newfound father. Roger Chang, our producer, is well familiar with those cries, I'm sure.
Yes, they are still in my head. But you know what? It passes.
That's what everyone says. I have my doubts.
Someday, Patrick.
The cries just evolve, right?
Yeah.
I think
it goes from like, meh to like, can I have the car keys?
Well, a lot of people have been crying about Facebook and Cambridge Analytics. And one thing that might change the whole landscape on that kind of thing, not that thing in particularly, is a new European regulation. Patrick's going to help us understand. But let's start with a few tech things you should know.
Bloomberg reports that the U.S. FTC will send Facebook a letter asking questions regarding how it handled global science research's violation of terms when it handed over user data it had gathered to a third party without authorization. A consent decree from 2011 requires Facebook to get user consent for certain changes to privacy settings.
IBM announced a deep learning as a service program. Developers can train neural networks using frameworks like TensorFlow, PyTorch, and Caffe, and only pay for the GPU time they use. The DLAAS, as it's shortened, runs on IBM's Watson platform. So Oh, I should have said it like that. You're right.
No, I don't think anyone should ever say it like that again.
The loss.
Now that I've tried it out.
No.
Nimbus Data of Irvine, California has introduced the ExaDrive solid state drive, which can store 100 terabytes. Joey Image, I'm looking at you. The Nimbus is smaller and more power efficient, and Nimbus says a standard rack in a data center, which is what these are meant for, could hold more than 100 petabytes worth of ExaDrives. Drives will cost several $1,000s and become available this summer. Let's talk a little bit more about Facebook, but this time regarding their security officer.
You're right. The New York Times reports Facebook Chief Information Security Officer Alex Stamos is leaving the company in August, citing sources and that internal disagreements over how the social networks should deal with its role spreading false and misleading information. In response to the story, Stamos tweeted that his role at the company did change, but that he was still working at Facebook. They say he's leaving in August, though, so maybe he's playing a little trick here.
Yeah, he's very, very well phrased. I'm still working here until August. So I guess we'll find out in August. But the central tension has been about legal and policy teams versus the security team. The security team pushes for more disclosure about things. Disclosure reports. How are nation states asking us about things? And the legal folks want to lock that up.
Well, and according to what I have read, Stamos's team has, started from over 100 people to like less than 5 now. So this isn't necessarily something that happened over the last couple of days. It may have been a winding down of a department in general.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if recent events might not change. I mean, it's changing people's minds, I think, everywhere and everything, but including at Facebook. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, it does sound like what Stamos is pushing for is let people know what's happened, and Facebook is a little wary of it being misinterpreted or mishandled. And he does admit, he's like, yeah, I've had disagreements with my colleagues. So he's not trying to deny that part of it.
Moving on, after viewing video recorded by Uber's self-driving car of the fatal collision it was involved in on Monday, Tempe, Arizona Police Chief Sylvia Moir told the San Francisco Chronicle, quote, I suspect preliminarily it appears that the Uber car would likely not be at fault in this accident. It's very clear it would have been difficult to avoid this collision in any kind of mode, autonomous or human-driven, based on how she came from the shadows right into the roadway. Meanwhile, Toyota said on Tuesday it would also pause testing of its autonomous vehicles on public roads. So, the companies are spooked, even though as information seems to come out about this, it is, obviously very tragic, but not something that appeared to be at the fault of the driver who was behind the wheel or the fault of the autonomous vehicle necessarily.
It seems, I mean, you say they're spooked. Yeah, they're probably spooked, but also another word could be acting responsibly. Maybe they're thinking,
those are not mutually exclusive. You're right. Yeah,
I guess. Yeah. And on the other hand, I think it is obviously tragic. A death is never something not tragic, I would say, but it's also for the development of this technology. It's if it turns out that it is indeed not the responsibility of the car or actually even the driver that's involved, it makes the first incident, it puts the autonomous car in the clear for the first incident. And if the first one is putting the responsibility on the car, then it paints the whole industry with that brush. Now that the first one hopefully will not be, the car will not be responsible. I'm sorry, it's just weird to say the car is responsible. It's a little bit too anthropomorphized. But if something happens, and next time something will happen, and it will, you can always point to the first one and say, wait a second, before you draw conclusions. This can happen sometimes, and it might not necessarily be the responsibility of the car.
Well, and let's be responsible and say that Chief Moore is saying our preliminary investigation indicates it might be this. We still don't know for sure. There might still be charges that might have to be faced because even if the car is not at fault, and by the way, the safety driver is liable. So even if the safety driver is not at fault, there may be other things the safety driver did that they could be cited for. Maybe there was not a complete stop. I would doubt that with a self-driving car. Usually they err the other way, but we don't know all the facts. That said, if this ends up being what it looks like, which is an unavoidable accident, she was walking a bike, came out away from the crosswalk in the dark. The crosswalk was lighted, but the area where she was not, according to what the chief said. It would never have been avoided by a human driver either. It would have been very difficult for anyone to avoid this accident. I think that kind of shortcuts this conversation to a more pertinent situation, which is, are we going to be okay with that? Or will we hold autonomous cars to a higher standard and say, sure, maybe a human driver wouldn't have been able to avoid this accident, but an autonomous car should? Because it wasn't a malfunction of the sensor that could be fixed. It's saying it's unavoidable means it will happen again, right?
Well, and, when you think in terms of just like statistics, of how many people die in car-related deaths every year, and we talked about this on the show yesterday.
Well, and we've got an email about this that we're going to talk about a little bit later.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it pushes some buttons. And a lot of us, I mean, myself included, I don't really know the answer. I mean, I know AI isn't perfect. we all have seen that in various, ways that AI is supposed to take over, the roles of humans. This is one of those situations where it's like, well, it's easy to be like, well, can't have robots roaming the streets. They're going to kill people. But people also make mistakes too. So it's like, how do we weigh that stuff so that we're responsible about how the technology evolves?
IBM is launching Watson Assistant for companies that want to build virtual assistants for their products. Unlike Amazon Voice Services or Google Assistant, Watson is a white label product. That means the clients control everything. They can brand it how they want. They can make it have a different wake word. They can train it on their own data sets. And these Watson instances are siloed, meaning the data isn't pooled like it is with Google or Amazon. Harman is apparently using Watson to build a voice assistant for a Maserati concept car, and the Pepper robot at Munich Airport is using Watson as well. So not a lot of widespread use of this yet, but it's an interesting take where they're, in this world of, we think maybe these companies have too much data collected. This is a way for companies to keep that data within their walls.
However, those types of AIs and programs run on data. So Watson and IBM have data from other sources, I'm sure. But I wonder how much, if they're entirely 100% siloed, or if there's something that
the silo, that's a very good point. The silo does not refer to what created the assistant in the first place, but there's no data passed along. The siloing says you train our algorithms on your data set, and any data you collect in the use of your assistant, you keep. It doesn't get sent to IBM. Like if you put Amazon Voice Services on something, it gets sent to Amazon. Google Assistant, it gets sent to Google. In these cases, it won't.
Right. So I guess in that case, it is siloed from the company that's using this white label service perspective. I think it's a good move on IBM, because I don't think anyone would use an IBM assistant or Watson assistant as such, but creating as a white label thing is different enough that it will.
Who doesn't want the Maserati assistant? Yeah,
exactly. Google announced a new program to fight misinformation called the Google News Initiative, similar to what the company already offers in Europe through the Digital News Initiative. Highlights include striving for accurate journalism, particularly during breaking news events, helping news sites continue to grow from a business perspective, and creating new tools to help journalists do their jobs. Google pledges to invest $300 million towards the effort over the next 3 years.
Wait, Google is just great at naming things, aren't they?
It's almost Microsoftian, isn't it?
The Google News Initiative.
Well, I don't know. It smells
says
a little
the folks on Daily Tech News Show, so I'm not going to.
I think it sounds a little bit like the Avengers Initiative, and they're saving the world all the time. So
Well, I mean, a lot of this is like, okay, you want to help journalists and you want to, do this and that. $300 million over the next several years that's significant amount. So in that sense, especially because there's already a program that the company is running in the UK that this is modeled after, it's not total, this is
It's not insignificant, right?
No, yeah. I mean, it's Google has money, and
I mean, it's not a bad program in and of itself, but Google is doing it for public relations reasons, and maybe that means it may still be a good program, but they're doing it because they're perceived as ruining journalism, and they want to try to do something that shows that they're not.
And maybe they also care about misinformation and the issues that causes.
They may both be
Two
true.
birds, one stone.
Guys, want to talk about dating apps?
Yeah, sure.
Good, great. Because I got a story. Yesterday, TechCrunch reported that Match, which is the parent company of both Tinder and Match.com, which came before it, was suing rival dating app Bumble for patent infringement and misuse of intellectual property. The story is Match alleges that Bumble copied its world-changing card swipe-based, this is Match's terms, mutual opt-in premise and its patent. It filed in 2013, but just got granted a few months ago. Bumble responded today in a blog post that alleges Match actually made multiple attempts to buy Bumble, so this is probably what some of this is about anyway, as well as launched a copycat of Bumble's Ladies First feature. For anybody who doesn't know what that means, it means the woman has to initiate conversation with a man. That's what that means. In the letter, Bumble says to Match, and this is good, quote, "We swipe left on your attempted scare tactics. And on these endless games, we swipe left on your assumption that a baseless lawsuit would intimidate us."
Left is reject.
Left is reject.
Okay, good.
I think they should put this in a dramatic speech done in front of a huge crowd. We swipe left on your attempted tactics. We swipe left.
When I say swipe left. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's, the whole thing is, I don't know. I mean, again, I probably am slightly closer to dating apps than maybe present company, but they're all more or less the same. Tinder did really change a lot of the ways that people are using apps, but that is no different than any other app that works really well, like a messaging app, where other messaging apps end up sort of looking at that first messaging app, So the idea of dating is, this is not novel. It's just sort of human behavior and what works.
It feels like a situation where Match holds a patent, knows that in the current patent climate, it could probably crush a lot of people because of the way patent law works in the United States, hasn't done that for whatever reason, and is using it as a weapon against a Bumble. It doesn't mean they don't have a valid case. It means they get to decide when to exercise that weapon. And because Bumble is not playing well with the acquisition offers, they're going to try to hold it over their head. So I think Bumble's right, but I also think Match is right.
I would also argue that, yes, dating apps are all the same, but the swiping thing, regardless of how valid the patent is, and that's, I'm sure, subject to discussion, it did change things. It did put Tinder on the map. Everyone knows about swiping left and swiping right, even if you've never used Tinder. So the fact that they would copy it, it is something a little bit different. It's like, I don't know, the Facebook like. Everyone knows that thumbs up thing, and it's not as important, but I don't know. The swiping is more than just a insignificant thing that everyone had anyway. It was more, yeah.
I swipe right
Even
on
in the
your
presentation. Thank you.
To get all the tech headlines each day in about 5 minutes, subscribe to Daily Tech Headlines. You can get it on the Amazon Echo, the Google Home, the Anchor app, and of course, as a podcast in the podcast app and many others at dailytechheadlines.com. So coming up on May 25th, Europe's General Data Protection Regulation, you're going to hear it commonly referred to as GDPR, goes into effect. It requires that users know, understand, and consent to what data is collected about them and how it's used. So it's for the user. It says companies can't just do what they want. They have to tell you what they're going to do in clear language, and you have to know about it and agree to it. Patrick, what else should we know about GDPR?
It is a huge amount of things. It covers a lot of different areas, mostly, well, it is entirely about private data. But I think a good way of thinking about it is taking a bird's eye view and trying to understand what it tries to do. And the way it it looks at the situation is the data is the property of the individual service users, the clients or the people, and that property, that data, should be respected by the companies and treated with ethically. And the issue is, you can tell people all day long you should do things ethically and respect this or that, especially companies. If you don't constrain them by laws, then they're not going to, and they shouldn't. That's how you decide how companies behave. You write laws. So the GDPR is taking the approach of telling the huge companies of the world, and yes, they're mostly, I would say, American companies, but this applies to everyone. You have to be respectful of the user's data, and this manifests in many different ways. One example is, as you mentioned, you have to be able to understand in which ways your data is going to be used once you sign up for a service. And this is, when you start exploring that, you get into the murky side, because that's very easy to say, but how do you actually do that? How do you boil down a gigantic legalese of a EULA into a readable form? And that is what those companies are being tasked for. They have to present to you that information in an understandable way.
But who decides what is understandable to, the general populace?
That's a big question, and these kinds of questions are very numerous in this GDPR. But the thing is, I think the way people look at it here in Europe and in the governmental bodies that have decided on this, and just to be clear, the GDPR is the EU version, and each state has to implement it on its own after that. So it might differ a little bit here and there, but those questions are valid and they are going to be asked. But the thing is, the alternative to designing the intent is to just do nothing, right? And to leave the situation as it is now. And I think a lot of people are thinking this is not reasonable either. So it's kind of a which is the least unreasonable approach to this issue that you can think of, and that's the one you should probably implement. And in this case, I think, given the way Facebook's image and what they do, and all social networks and companies, on tech companies in general, I think a lot of people are starting to take the approach that maybe they've been behaving a little bit recklessly, and they need to be brought in even just a little bit. So understanding what Facebook is going to be doing with your data once you give it to the company is not an unreasonable ask. Now, how you exactly implement it is more difficult than just saying, hey, this and that. But the ask itself doesn't seem unreasonable. I don't know if you guys agree.
I love the part of this that requires it to be a natural language. I have the same question Sarah has, which is who gets to decide that? But I like the aim of it, which is to say, hey, putting up a link to a terms of service that says use of this site means you agree to all this legalese, which is what we've lived with till now, is horse apples. That even if it's been legal, that's not valid. That's not really anybody agreeing to anything. So this is, even if it doesn't work, I think it's the right direction. I think it's great, if for no other reason that it's an attempt to say, hey, maybe we need to actually have people understand what they're agreeing to before we can consider it legal that they agreed to it.
And even I'm agreeing with you, but I also think that initial reaction, well, how are you going to explain it? Well, it could be fairly simple. Like, instead of saying, we use this data to improve our services, which is usually the thing, and they list every single thing you could ever think of in there. You could say, well, we use your data to share with your contacts you've established on our service, and to offer you better, to serve you better targeted ads. And that's not difficult to understand, and some people might not care. Most people will not care, but even if it's still a little bit complicated, people will have an opportunity, and researchers and people who do care about these things will have an opportunity to sift through all of it and point out when some things are maybe not as kosher as they should be.
Yeah,
There's also
Oh, I was just going to mention Natasha Nico's article from Wired. Good read. We'll have a link to it in the show notes about the fact that because Europe is doing this, a lot of companies are applying their changes worldwide because it's cheaper. Google's changing its dashboard to comply with GDPR and be easier to use and easier to read, but that's going to help everyone else in the US to be able to use that easier as well. So that's another knock-on effect of the GDPR going into place.
I also want to mention before we move on that there are financial penalties attached to all of this. And that's, you can look at this and say, oh, the government is impeding innovation, blah, blah, blah. And, maybe it might have an effect there. But it also enables government to enforce some of the rules that have kind of been common knowledge or moral knowledge in the past, but that have not been able to be enforced. So that is also an important part of it. It creates a system to actually, rebalance the power between the big tech companies and states, which is very imbalanced right now.
Well, I hope this ends up being more than an annoying pop-up that tells you the cookies are there.
I really hope so as well.
Sounds like it might. Thanks to everybody who participates in our subreddit. You can submit stories and vote on them at dailytechnewsshow.reddit.com and facebook.com/groups/dailytechnewsshow.
We have a thing of the day from Nate Langson, who's telling us what's going on across the pond in text message, but it's a little bit different this time, and it involves Geisha tech.
Thanks, guys. This week, I'm going to do something a little bit different and actually suggest that you listen to an episode that is actually slightly older than the most recent one that'll be available on our feed. Episode 128 of Text Message. And the reason is I recorded it in Japan, in Kyoto, with my wife just over a week ago. And we managed to get inside what's called a geisha house, where the traditional artists and entertainers in the geisha world live. And we managed to speak to some of these geishas, these performers, to find out the kind of technology that they have inside these incredibly traditional environments. It's a very different show to what we normally do, but if anyone's got any interest at all in Japanese history, I would strongly recommend giving it a listen. Or if you're just curious about what it's like to tour around Tokyo and Kyoto at the moment, we've made quite a few street-based observations. That's available right now at techpodcast.uk. Back to you.
That Nate likes it, man. He said he was going to Japan, asked me about my visit to Kyoto a couple years ago, and I said, oh, we had a great time trying to find real geisha in the traditional area, but we never had any luck. He goes there and gets an interview about geisha tech.
On his honeymoon, no less.
On his honeymoon.
This is a man who is dedicated to his craft. It sounds great. I can't wait to listen.
All right, let's see what's in the mailbag.
Joe the pilot wrote in. Lance Uenhoff was a guest on our show yesterday, and we were talking, I think it was before the show actually started, about the fact that he lives on the East Coast and had some flight issues lately because of weather. Joe the pilot says, keep in mind, the FAA does ground fleets sometimes, but an accident with a pilot is probably because we're mostly out flying. Wasn't that long ago, a 787 would get parked until the battery issue was resolved. Industry swapped out to dumber batteries if they wanted to keep flying. Operators were almost always parked until the flap issue got resolved. Decades ago, the whole fleets would get parked on rudder and engine issues. We just don't have much money tied up in autonomous cars that finding an impractical fix to tide us over from the FAA restriction would make economic sense, at least not yet.
Yeah, so he's referring to Lance saying we don't ground all planes when there's a problem, and Joe gave a nice balanced response to that. Some people are like, yes, we do ground planes, and Joe's like, yeah, well, sometimes it happens occasionally. So thank you, Joe, for sharing that. And also Ryan was one of a few people that wrote in and thought that our tone yesterday was that autonomous cars are definitely safer than human-driven cars. He says, what data is this based on? In my brief Googles, I couldn't find any indication that autonomous cars have logged nearly enough miles to be able to make a comparison like that. Now that the first robot murdered a human, I'd like to make a case for the human driver. The IIHS in the US reports only 1.16 deaths per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. Obviously, anything greater than 0 is bad. But at 1 death per 86.2 million miles, I think the skills of human drivers are being unfairly minimized. Not only that, as you can see, pedestrian and cyclist deaths make up only 18% of that number. So 1 death per 478.9 thousand miles, if my math is correct. Show me the facts. P.S. Tone is difficult in email. This is meant to be about 75% sincere. Which
that's a good signal.
I absolutely love that P.S. from Brian.
And I mean,
made all the difference.
That's completely valid. This, we're just now starting to build up data from how autonomous cars actually work based on how we think they should work.
Yeah.
That said, and I'm not saying it's going to be any better than humans because I really don't know. That said, a robot's not going to look at their phone because no one's going to text the robot, or the robot won't be drunk or tired, or there are a lot of factors that go into human drivers that I'm not saying it means that everybody's a bad driver, certainly not, but it is a factor and can't be ignored.
Yeah, and yesterday I was coming out hard, assuming most of the audience is going to be leaning towards an autonomous car has killed a driver. I guess autonomous cars aren't safe. And so I was like, hey, wait a minute. This is 1 death. We have many more deaths with human-driven cars. I was not trying to make the point that thus we can prove that autonomous cars are safer. In fact, where we got in the conversation was, I think, we don't have enough data yet. This is not enough data to lean one way or the other. And thank you to Ryan and everyone else who sort of wrote in to make sure we lean back that other way and go, hey, hold on. This doesn't prove autonomous cars are or are not safer. It doesn't prove anything.
There's also a point to be made, which I think the fear was the public would freak out and the general public would freak out when an autonomous car would be involved in an accident, not realizing that, or not making the connection that there are accidents all the time when we don't necessarily freak out. So that's why we go into that, overly optimistic trend about autonomous cars.
Yeah.
Well, thanks to both Joe and Ryan for writing in, and thanks to everybody who writes in. And also thanks to Patrick Beja. I know sleep has been a challenge for you recently, but it's always nice to see you every week. Let folks know where they can keep up with your work.
You can go to frenchspin.com, for example, or follow me on Twitter and listen to my shows. The one I would recommend today would be the latest episode of the Phileas Club, where we had a hour-long conversation with 3 gun owners about gun laws. And it's something that was really difficult to put together in order to be both respectful and coherent and lots of other positive adjectives. I think it went pretty well, and it might not be super easy for people to listen to, but I think it's an important way of talking about all of this. So
no, it's a great example of arguing to learn, not arguing to win. You had 3 people in favor of guns talking to Patrick, and they all respected each other. It's beautiful.
I do want to say we talked about this and talked about what reasonable gun laws could be implemented. Some they agreed with, some they didn't agree with. But what came out was, I think, a lot more common ground than people think when they look at everything else. So
that's the Phileas Club. Yes, at FrenchSpin.com. Real quick, I want to finish with another email from Brent, who is like, hey, Tom, Sarah, Roger, and the fantastic DTNS team. I wanted to let you know I'm having to reduce my monthly pledge starting next month. Unfortunately, I lost my job last week, and I'm adjusting accordingly to make sure the family's taken care of at home. Thank you for any support, Brent. We're sorry to hear that you lost a job. Speaking of family, he says, I want to throw out a request to my fellow DTNS contributors. Please consider adding $1 a month more to your current pledge to help the show not lose the balance of my monthly contribution. The show is great, and I feel bad that I can't keep up my current level for the short term. Once I'm back up and running, I'll increase my contribution again. P.S. If anyone needs a tech-oriented general manager in the Bay Area, drop me a line. Mostly I love
patrons helping patrons.
Exactly. I love that Brent would put out the call like that. Thank you, Brent. But also, if you need a tech-oriented general manager in the Bay Area, feedback@dailytechnewsshow.com will put you in touch with Brent.
And honestly, I think that person is kind of incredibly bright because he managed to turn his reducing of spending for the show into a kind of advertisement for his resume. So I'd hire him.
Sounds
He
like a
seems
skilled
smart.
general manager, if you ask me.
Yeah. Yeah, real hustler. Thanks, Brent. And anybody who wants to get back to us, whether it's a question, a comment, letting us know that you are skilled and for hire. Feedback at dailytechnewsshow.com. Anything. We just want to hear from you. We are also live Monday through Friday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 2030 UTC. You can find out more at dailytechnewsshow.com/live.
Back tomorrow with Dr. Kiki as our guest. Talk to you then.
Woo!
This show is part of the Frog Pants Network. Get more at frogpants.com.
The Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Good show, you guys.
Yeah, good show.
Sorry if I was less coherent than usual. I'm not sure. I don't
you
know.
were,
No,
if
you're great.
anything more. I
Just
don't want to
that
say
little.
more, but no, you were perfectly the same awesome Patrick. you
Okay,
are.
perfectly coherent. That's great.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell if the baby was crying or not. I hear him.
I didn't hear anything.
Yeah, you wouldn't though. I don't know.
Oh.
So I'm gonna go check out because my wife should.
Yeah, go for it, man. Thanks
Yeah.
again.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks,
Good to
guys.
see you.
Bye. I'll
Bye.
reach out to you, Roger, for the things. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, chat room. I love you too.
Oh, we love you, Beja.
Oh, I forgot to turn off my. Unmute myself. Whatever.
Well, have you got us the perfect title, Roger? No pressure. Just make it the perfect title.
Let me see.
Wow, I just got this Bumble email, the PR
Oh, yeah?
email. I don't know why I just got it. Yeah, it's very heavy-handed. Mhm.
That's usually the case for me. I always see news stories before I get the email from the company about the news story.
Right.
With rare exceptions. I'm trying to think. There was recently one where I actually got the email before the news broke. And I can't remember what it was now. But yeah, almost always the story breaks and then the email finally shows up. I think because when in those things
they
send
may
it
also
through a
roll
campaign.
out not a total mass email to begin
Yeah, that's what I was
with.
going to say is they send them out through their campaign managers, which are actually
Right.
most of those are built to not send all the emails at once because they trip spam filters.
Oh yeah, listen to this. So this is coming from Bumble. We, a woman-funded, woman-led company, aren't scared of aggressive corporate culture. That's what we call bullying, and we swipe left on bullies. Ask the thousands of users we've blocked from our platform for bad behavior.
You know what's funny
This is like
about the whole
like
swipe
a note
left?
to match. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's trying to rally, right?
Sure, of
It's
course.
like, hey, ladies, look what
I
Match is
just-
doing. Don't support
Yeah,
that.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I might be a little out of touch, but I don't know anyone who's like, Bumble's the way that we, get rid of corporate culture.
Yeah. What's funniest to me about all of this is swipe right is the only thing I ever hear, right? And so if
Sure.
somebody says swipe right, I'm like, oh, that's a good thing. Swipe left, you never hear anyone say swipe left, which is why I'm like, wait, that's the bad thing, right?
Tom, you do. You swipe left on all things you hate.
Well, no, but people don't say it. Do you hear people say it? I hear people say, I'll swipe right on that. I rarely hear people say, I swipe left.
I think the joke goes both ways. Like, what's
Oh,
your
sure,
most
it
hated
works both
food?
ways. I just don't.
Like, if you don't like spinach, you swipe left on spinach.
I
Everyone
never
knows
hear
what that
anybody
means.
saying that. All right. I'm out of touch then. That's what that is.
We're all out of touch. That's
Out of
fine.
touch.
You're out of touch.
What about Europe fights for the user? And not
Europe
Tron?
fights for the user. Yeah, we've
You
done the
gotta
Tron
fight. Yeah, we
headline
did
before,
that.
I'm pretty sure.
All right.
Shabbat. Look.
See, we swipe left.
A show without merit.
Um,
You got to fight for your
Watson
right
with
to
those
swipe
AI
right.
jobs. This swipe could change your life.
I mean, I guess that's true. Turning right
Self-firing.
on a street could change your life. Who knows? Bumble swipes left on Tinder. It's sort of like the
Now
opposite.
every Sherlock can have a
Also,
Watson.
so there's nothing about GDPR, I guess, huh?
Other than your fights for the user.
Which is good. We've used it before.
What about if we change it?
But you guys are stymied, huh?
What would you say? Like,
I'm trying to think of something clever, and I'm just I'm stymied by that.
I kind of like GDPR greater than EULA.
Where's that?
Oh, that just came in. Yeah, that's good.
It's rocketing up the charts too. Look at that. Jeez.
Yeah, I voted it up. I voted it up.
Great. I'm into it.
All right, done. Nice.
Yay.
Good job, Nick with a C.
Nick with a C, meaning Nick without a K?
No, he has a K too.
Oh, I see.
It's not NIK.
The traditional Nick.
There is an NIK Nick in the DTNS audience.
Oh, I see.
I don't know if that's why.
Got it.
Nick with a C is Nick with a C. But.
Got it.
We need an origin story, Nick.
I was born.
I was bit by a radioactive username.
I ate all my vitamins and had a good diet, and now I'm healthy, man. So,
you gotta swipe for your right. The Bumble.
One of my favorite Instagram accounts to this day is Tinder Nightmares. Don't know if you guys follow that or not. But it's basically, when it doesn't have to apply to Tinder, but it just happens to be Tinder focused. When you match with somebody, then you can like talk to each other. It's not text. They don't have your phone number yet. It's within the app. And it's all sort of like original things that, mostly guys, put out to try to get the conversation started, where it's just like, yeah, that's the worst pickup line in the world.
Have you ever had anyone do a magic trick to break the ice?
Over the Tinder app?
Oh.
I have a feeling Roger may not have fully been following your story.
I mean, I think that'd be amazing, actually, and probably wouldn't be part of Tinder Nightmares, but
look behind you.
Magic tricks are great. Just not sure how that would be conveyed. Wouldn't be a nightmare, though. It might just be like, your trick has fallen flat.
Can you send videos
text.
or is it just text? It's just text.
I don't know.
So it would have to be limited to like, I'm thinking of a card.
Yeah. Or do you like magic tricks? Perhaps you'd like to meet me tonight so that I can show you the magic trick, because it just doesn't translate.
I don't know if that's clever or horrible.
Well, it might be.
Do you like bowling? Because my team is bowling tonight, and we could use an extra player.
Yep. I mean,
do you like cleaning? Because I'm cleaning my car tonight. If you want to join me,
right?
Yeah, that's not a good one.
What's wrong with bowling? Bowling is a fun activity.
Sure, no, bowling was fine.
You guys aren't throwing out pickup lines. You're just saying like, "Hey, do you like mopping your floor? Because my house is dirty." Like,
that's a horrible pickup line.
And when you're done, let yourself out.
I think you have the wrong service.
Ever date. Period.
Oh man, I do not miss it. I'll tell you that.
Ooh, yeah, it's just gotten weird.
I don't even remember having pickup lines.
I don't know. I mean, I know that that's sort of like a thing that we all know is like, oh, pickup lines, right? But I don't remember really ever hearing any. Not like where I'm like, oh, what a line that you learned somewhere. Not really. Just
no. It's more of a conversational gambits are the reality. I think.
Well, and sort of like the vibe is, happening or not.
Right.
but not because somebody had like a book of lines that they're
Yeah.
trying out.
It's more like, oh, I see you're drinking an IPA. Have you tried Goose Island?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if the girl's like, you're like,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
I
thanks.
still like
you like
IPAs. Like it wasn't a lie.
I see you like to eat. Would you like to have dinner?
I see you are a bipedal human.
Right. You appear
like-
to enjoy protein in order to survive.
Would you like to stand upright with me? Sir, you're not an alien, are you?
Yeah. Oh, you're an alien? Okay, then walk away.
Yeah.
Okay. No one's
Swipe
stopping
right.
you.
You
Wait,
seem to
I mean,
be
left.
swaying to this particular tune. Perhaps if we meet somewhere else where they play more of this.
Oh, this is truly the worst. We are Tinder nightmares.
Yeah.
We're actually
Worse
Actually,
than
that would be
nightmare.
great. Podcast.
Oh man.
I
Let me
will
ask
say
you this.
I wouldn't call this a pickup line necessarily. Who even knows anymore? But I will say of my 7 Plus, which is shattered and has been for some time, and I just sort of abandoned getting the iPhone 10 because I was like, I'll get it when I really need it. It is the #1 conversation starter that
Oh, yeah.
strangers next to me, no matter where I am, DMV line, bar, it could be anywhere. Hey, how'd you shatter your screen? Or I'm like, I dropped it.
Yeah.
I smacked someone.
That could go several ways. That could be a pickup line, right? Like, oh, I'm going to start a conversation.
Yeah.
Or it could just be somebody who's like, whoa,
Yeah, like that's like really shattered.
like that's really.
How do you live?
Yeah.
I just used to wear very amusing T-shirts, and that seemed to work.
That was your tactic?
I think Roger just jumped ahead in the conversation.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you take the screen? And
well, T-shirts probably no. And again, like it's not like people are like being leery about it. It's
Right.
just, there's like I have a lot of people being like, "Tell me that story." Where I'm like, it would be like having a scar on your face, and someone's like, "What happened?" And you're like,
Well, I think the
Not
first time I
necessarily.
saw your phone after it was broken, I said something like, "Wow, your phone's real broken." Or
But
something
that's
stupid
like
that.
we're already friends.
Yeah,
You weren't like some guy next to me
Yeah,
at
I
the DMV line who had an appointment but still had to wait 2 hours.
How'd you break your
bitter.
phone? Smashing it over the head of the last guy who asked me how I broke my phone.
I'm gonna say that.
you know what? If you buy me dinner, booze, and my rent, I'll talk to you about it for 10 minutes.
Dinner,
don't get
booze,
to
and
come
rent.
here.
Gosh, that'd be a good, sure.
So the
That
deal
seems
is
fair.
they pay for a solo dinner, some booze and some rent. They don't get to come. And in exchange, they get to talk to you for dinner.
Yeah.
There was actually, I'm actually thinking about this now. I'm not kidding. It's a real conversation starter. To the point where I almost don't want to fix my phone anymore. A guy was like, he was next to me and he's like, "Oh, wow, look at your shattered screen. Look at mine." And I looked at it and I'm like, "Yeah, that's pretty shattered. Huh, how about that? Both have shattered screens." And then he was kind of like, "No, look more closely. Ha ha, wink, wink." And it was just a picture of a shattered screen that he had set as his screensaver, his locked screen.
Really?
So I was like, what? No way. And I was like, yeah, you're weird. I can't. Too much. Too much of a pickup line.
Yeah, that's a pickup line almost, right?
But I was like, it took me like a couple minutes to like get what he was saying, and he was like, "Get it?" And I'm like, "Okay."
That's a weed out factor though, right? And I feel like pickup lines are a weed out factor where it's like, I am looking for someone who doesn't mind that I use stupid pickup lines. And if you do, then yes, we'll both move on to the,
Sure. I think the pickup line that's like confusing for everyone that has to be explained, it's like the joke, if you have to explain it, maybe it wasn't that funny. Delivery needs a little work.
Yeah, but that one person that you run into and is like, "That's hilarious. I love it." The match made in heaven, right?
Then it's the one. So yeah. Adventures in swiping. Adventures in swiping. That's not a bad idea for a show, actually.
Adventures in swiping. Hey.
You know what? It could be an offbeat rom-com.
I think it would be by definition. Kind of romantic, kind of funny, very
But kind of
offbeat.
scary at the same time. Like, what?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we have a published show
Excellent.
of 30 minutes of length involving discussion of tech news, as promised, as per our SLA. So,
our EULA states,
yeah,
in no uncertain terms.
So thank you all for joining us.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. All right, stream is stopped.